Hello everyone, in this video I'm going to show you how to use Redux in your React project. So let's first create our React project. So type npx create -react-app space and then the name of your project. I'm gonna call this reducer. Press enter. Now that is done, cd to the project. In here we need to install some dependencies. So type npm i-save react redux dev tools extension and redux-thunk. Press enter. Now open your project in a code editor. Inside the source folder, remove some files that we do not want. So I'm gonna delete app.test.js, logo, report web vitals, set up tests, and then create some folders. Go here and then right click, create new folder, type actions, still add source folder, right click, create a new folder. This one is reducers, a new one. This one is containers, and the last one components. Okay, these are the 4 folders that we will later put some files in. Now let's go to index.js. Let's make some changes. So I'm going to remove this part, remove report web vitals, and then remove react.strict-mode also down here. Now up here, let's import create store, apply middleware from Redux, import provider from React Redux, import thunk from React-thunk, import root reducer from, that's going to be in reducers, root reducer. Now go to reducers, create a new file called root reducer.js. In here, import combine reducers from Redux, import games from game reducer. We're gonna create this file in a moment. Then export default combine reducers. In here, put games in. Now create a new file in reducers, name it game reducer.js. So in here you need to import fetch games request, fetch games underscore success, and the last one is fetch games failure. These are from actions types. Down here, let's create initial state items empty array loading is false, error is null. Then export default function game reducer, pass in state with the initial state and action. Down here use the switch function, action.type. The first case is fetch game request. It's gonna return the previous state. Loading will be true and error will be null. The second case is fetch game's success. This will return a previous state. Loading will be false. Items will be from action.payload.games. Third case is fetch failure. This will return previous state. Loading is false. Error is action.payload.error. And don't forget the default case. So type default colon return the state. Save. Now we are done with the reducers. I will come back and explain what we did later. But now let's finish coding. Go back to index.js. Now that we imported root reducer here, let's create initial state with an empty object and then create a store using the create store function from Redux root reducer that we imported and initial state. Okay, also we need to apply middleware and pass in thunk. Down here we need to wrap our app file in provider so that our React can use Redux. So up here type provider and then you need to pass in the store that you created here. Close it, move this one down here and save. Now go to app.js. We need to work on this one. I'm gonna remove everything in return here. Not everything. I'm gonna keep the div. Remove everything else inside. Remove the logo. And I'm gonna import game list container from the containers folder, and the name of the file will be game list container. So in here pass game list container in and save. Now we need to create this container, so go to containers folder, create a new file called game list container.js. So import React. We're gonna use state, use effect from React, import connect from React Redux, import prop types from prop types, import a function from actions called fetch games from action game actions, and then const game list container, and fetch games. We're gonna take in items, loading, and error. Return, export default, connect game list container. Up here, game list container dot prop types, fetch games. This one is a function and is required, and games prop types, this one is an object and is also required. And then we have to create map state to props so that we can use state in our Redux. So map state to props, state, and we're gonna take just games, state.games, and also map dispatch to props. Okay, that will be fetch games. In here, inside the connect higher order component, pass in map state to props, and also map dispatch to props. Okay, so here above the return function, use effect arrow function. I'm gonna call fetch games here, and we can console.log and say like from use effect, and then console.log items here to see what's inside, and down here type in fetch games. So first we're gonna check if there is an error. If there is an error, we're gonna pass in an error message. If there is no error but it is still loading is true, then we're gonna return div let's say loading, and also console.log from outside use effect. Okay, console.log items, and here if there is no error, it's false and it's not loading anymore, then right here the last return we will pass in a component and also value items self-closing tag, and we need to import this class up here. So import game list from, this one will be okay, this one is from components, game list, and save. Now let's create this component first. So go to components folder, create a new file called gamelist.js, import react from react, import prop types from prop types, const game list, and remember we passed in items, arrow function, and this one is gonna return div. Inside the div is a bullet point. Let's map out our item. So game arrow function inside li with the key game.id and close it, and inside type game.title, and rating is game.rating. Save, and down here type game list dot prop not prop type, okay, this one should be small p. Okay, not prototype. Prop types. Okay, be careful. So prop type, save, go back to game list. So this one is prop types. Okay, make sure that it's a small character. Prop types. Okay. Down here, pass in items, prop types, make sure that it's capital from this class, prop types. This one is array that is required, and export it out, export default, game list, save. Alright, one more inside actions. Remember, in the game list container, we need to use this fetch games, which is from the actions folder. So let's create this file. So inside the game folder, create a new file called game actions.js. Let's create another file called types.js. In here, type export const fetch games underscore request, fetch games request, export const fetch games success, fetch games success, export const fetch games failure, fetch games and failure. Save. So go back to game actions.js, import fetch games request fetch games success, and the last one fetch games failure from types. Down here, create a function called getGames, return a promise, new promise, resolve arrow function, and we're gonna set timeout. Resolve, inside resolve, create some data here. So games, which will be an array of object. So ID 0, title, let's say Resident Evil 4, rating 9.5. Another object, id1 title God of War rating 9, and one more id2 title The Last of Us 2 with the rating 7, and right here give it like 1000 milliseconds and save. Okay, and now down here export another function, fetch games. Inside we're gonna return pass in dispatch arrow function. First let's dispatch type fetch request, okay, and then return get games from here, call this function, and then when that is done take in the result JSON. We can console.log and save from JSON here to see the values. Console.log JSON, and then we're gonna dispatch another action type. So this one will be type fetch game success, and also pass along the payload, which is the result from get games. This one is here, okay, this games array, and we need to return something. Just return json.games, and then if there is something wrong we need to catch it. So .catch error function dispatch. Okay, we're gonna dispatch type. This one should be error. Okay, and the payload will be error. Make sure I spell fetch games failure. Okay, fetch games failure, not error. Okay. All right, I think that is why is this? Oh, make sure that you don't put quotation marks between the word. Okay, it should be fetch games failure. Make sure that I type everything correctly. Okay, let's try it out. In your root directory, type npm start to start the server. And here is the result. So let's inspect it. Go to console. Oh yeah, right, we don't need to use state, so go back to game list containers. I'm gonna remove use state, save. Okay, and refresh. It says items. Yeah, that's because we are printing out this value here. If we remove it and save and refresh, that error will go away because we're not using items. But I want to print it out anyway, so don't mind the warning. Let me explain what we just did. First, we imported provider from react-redux because React and Redux are totally strangers to one another. So we use provider so that both words can become one, so that React gets to know Redux. So we wrap everything inside provider. Because of this line, now our React and Redux can talk to one another. Our React then can get access to our Redux store, which we created here using create store from our Redux package. This is our global store, which contains global variables that we can share with all containers and components in our application. And we need to keep the values inside our store pure. In order to update any value inside the store, we need to do that through reducers. But being able to pass our data to store alone is not powerful enough. We want to do something with our data before storing that data inside the store. That is when apply middleware comes in. And this one takes any middleware from any packages. And here I use thunk from redux-thunk. This allows us to execute actions in the application before passing that data to the store. Now go to app.js, and here inside the class I pass game list container here because we wrap the app class inside the provider. So any classes that are the children of our app class will also receive thunk functions such as dispatch and get state from our middleware. And we use that dispatch function to call an action in our actions folder like this. Okay, this is where our dispatch function comes from. It is from here, okay, provider. Now we already checked our app class. Let's move to game list container, which is here. You probably noticed that I separated the containers from the components because the container here is like a full page that our user can come and visit, while this component, the game list component, is just a small part of our container here. The reasons why I did that, separating them two, is because I want this container to do all the data fetching and rendering, while this component, the game list component, I want it to be reusable elsewhere, not only in here in the game list containers. Okay, so you probably noticed the pattern here, the syntax and everything, like it is general enough to be used elsewhere. All it does is accept some props here and then print map out in the data like title and rating to the screen. Now, because the container will do all the heavy lifting, let's examine it. First, I imported connect from react-redux because I want this container to get data from our Redux store. And up here, prop types, its only function is to check if the props that we are accepting in this container are in the correct format. For example, in this class, I will use fetch games and games. So this function will check whether this is a function and whether this one games is an object. Let's say if this is an object, is a string, it will show us a warning of the wrong type. Okay, that's its only function. And then maps that to props. Remember when we created our store in the index.js here, this function maps that to props will take out that data to use it here in this container. As for map dispatch to props, kind of similar to map state to props, but this one instead of using data, it will use an action, a function from the actions folder in this container. And then we need to put map state to props and map dispatch to props inside the higher component named connect. And up here, I passed in fetch games from the actions folder and games from our Redux store. If you go to our reducers folder inside the game reducer.js, you will see the initial state, which is an object. Inside this object, there are items, loading, and error. So I use these over here. Okay, and next down here, I use effect so that I want to call fetch games, and I printed out the results. We will see that later. And then down here, if there is any error, it will show an error message. If it is still loading, it will return the loading screen. Else, it will return the list of all the games in our Redux store. Now, go to the game actions folder. I created the types file here to import them over here. This way we can avoid the typos, misspelling things. Okay, and back here I created a function called getGames, and I set the timeout to 1 second so that you can see the loading screen over here. And after the 1 second mark, it will return this array. Down here, this is the fetch games function that we used in the container. First, we dispatch the fetch games request and go to your reducer. It will call this case and return the previous state, set the loading to true and error to null. Return that to the container. This time the loading will be true and this will be displayed. And then when we go back to the game actions, we call getGames, which is here. Then we dispatch the fetch game success case. Go back to game reducer. This time we're gonna set the loading to false, and now we have our games data from here, and then we store this data to here. All right, and go back to the container. Now it's not error, the loading is false, and now we do have our game data set in items so that we can display the information to the user. To give you a better picture of how the flow works, I put console.log here inside the use effect, one more here outside the use effect function. So let's see that in action. I'm going to refresh this one more time. So first, when this class gets executed, it will skip the use effect and render whatever inside here, which includes this console.log message. So this was printed out from outside use effect, and the value will be empty for now. And then it gets rendered for the second time. This time it goes through the use effect and printed out this one, but the items here is still empty. All right, and now when this fetch games gets called, it will do its job. Okay, when it's done, it returns the result. If you go back to game actions here, okay, return it, and then we call the fetch game success, At this point, after the state gets updated, React will render this container, but this time it's not going to check use effect again. It already did once. So this was printed out outside use effect, and then it showed all the data from our Redux store to the user. So that's how it works. There is another package that I want to use. So let's go back to the terminal, exit from our server, and then npm i-save redux dev tools extension. This will allow us to see how our Redux state change. Now that is done, go back to your index.js. Let's import compose with dev tools from redux dev tools extension. Down here, let's create another variable called middleware and pass in thunk. Let's remove everything here and type compose with dev tools, and then pass in apply middleware, and then pass in the middleware. This will allow us to see the changes to our Redux store. Now, when you did that, npm start again, then go up here and click Redux. Here we can see how our Redux store works behind the scene. So first is fetch games request, and then it gets the success. So if you come over here, the current state, we see that items contain our list of games and loading is false. And in the action, you can see the payload that we passed to Redux. Okay. So this will be very useful and make it easy to debug. Right now we call fetch games automatically when we visit this game list container. What I want to do next is, instead of doing this, I'm going to create a button. So our user needs to click show games first before we call fetch games and show the list of games on the screen. So to do that, let's create another file. This one is called game list container with button.js. I'm gonna copy everything here, put it here, make some changes. So put with button, also down here, add prop types, replace it, and one more down here, and up, remove the use effect, we don't need it anymore, and come down here, we're gonna wrap the game list component inside this empty view, and this way we can add another item button. Let's say show games. On click fetch games, save, go to app.js, import game list container with button from containers with button. I'm gonna comment this out and then put game list container with button instead here. save, refresh it. Now nothing is showing up, not until we click show games. See? Awesome. Go back to game list container with button. If you want to also pass along some data to this function, we can do so by doing this. Okay, arrow function, and then called fetch games, and then you can put any data in here, like text, message, or number. Okay, so that this function will take this param, and right here we also need to say like number item, something like that, so that we can use this value inside the function. Okay, that's the idea. So I'm going to use the default here. Alright, I think that wraps up our tutorial. Hope you enjoy it, and see you next time. Bye bye.